And we are officially live. Hello. Welcome everyone to our second debate forum of the spring semester and our I think sixth now of our remote podcast version of the debate series. Really appreciate everybody joining us. I'm Ted McLoof, the executive director and moderator for the evening. I want to make a few announcements before we begin. We have a very exciting topic tonight, which is the topic of debate itself. We are going to be talking about how it is that we discuss politics in this country, the rhetoric we use, how heated it is, how debate is structured with our politicians, with our media, and just informal discourse. We're going to have a really great discussion about that and hopefully have a productive debate about that debate. Before we begin, I do have a few announcements. We just finished our international now high school tournament from last weekend, where we had nearly 300 students who were joining from about 60 high schools. So we want to appreciate again, give a huge thanks to our interns and to the faculty members who helped to put that on. It was a huge event, and we really appreciate it, and it really benefits the kids who participated. I also want to make a couple of announcements in terms of our previous and future debates. Our previous debate that we just finished 2 weeks ago, I want to announce the winners. I want to congratulate the affirmative team who was arguing that we should indeed break up big tech. That was our debate resolution last time. So I want to congratulate our winners for having that and for doing so well. And I want to also announce that our next debate in 2 weeks on February 18th is going to be also about technology, and the resolution there will be smart technology cannot be private. I'd like to invite you all to join us again at 7 o'clock on February 18th for our next one. And I want to also just remind everybody exactly what our forum is going to look like tonight. As you all know, this is an Oxford-style debate, meaning that the winners of tonight's debate are not going to be the people who get the most votes, but rather the people who change the audience's mind the most. And the only way that that is going to work is if you vote before and after the debate. If you look at the Google form underneath our live Facebook video, or if you're watching on YouTube, it'll be in our description and our bio. Please make sure that you vote both before and after the debate about how it is that you feel. Before you hear any of our debaters speak, what kind of ideas come to your mind when you hear the resolution, America's political debates miss the mark? Please vote now, and then wait until you hear all of our debaters speak, and then tell us how it is that you feel, and we will announce our winners at our next debate in 2 weeks once we find out how it is that you voted. I'd also like to point out that just like last time, we're going to be taking audience questions. So we have an audience questionnaire set up right under our video. Make sure that you submit questions and let us know what it is that you think, and let us know the questions that you have for our debaters, and they'll be answering that in our second round. Again, our debate is going to be going in 3 rounds as usual. We're going to have 2 4-minute opening statements from the affirmative and the negative for our debate. We're also going to have a second round where I'm going to be asking questions of our debaters. They'll have a chance to address each other and, of course, to answer your questions. And we'll also have a third round where we have 2 to 3 minute closing statements from both affirmative and our negative, after which, again, please vote again. We will announce the winner at our next debate. But as has been the case with our debates this year, when we have had to go remote and online, we are fortunate enough to have 2 absolutely fantastic guest speakers who have graciously agreed to be with us tonight. So I'd like to just introduce them quickly. Tonight we have a panel, so we have 2 guest speakers who are going to be talking to us. First, we have Professor Matthew Abraham. Professor Abraham is currently serving as the UA's chair of the Committee on Academic Freedom and Tenure, and he specializes in rhetoric, composition, and the teaching of English. He is the author of Out of Bounds, Academic Freedom, and the Question of Palestine, and also Intellectual Resistance and the Struggle for Palestine. Thank you, Professor Abraham, for being part of this. And I also would like to introduce Dr. Alan Buchanan. Dr. Buchanan has been honored as the James D. Duke Distinguished Professor of Philosophy at Duke University. Dr. Buchanan's discussions center around the idea of human rights in theory and practice, as well as social and political thought. His books include The Heart of Human Rights and Beyond Humanity, The Ethics of Biomedical Enhancement. We are honored to have here at U of A, Dr. Buchanan in their philosophy department. I want to thank both of our guest speakers for coming to join us today. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So as I said, tonight's resolution is specifically worded as America's political debates miss the mark. I want to talk just sort of more generally about the state of political discourse in our country. Obviously, we saw some sort of upsetting scenes at the Capitol a few weeks ago, and a lot of the reports suggest that those were a result of the heated rhetoric and heated political discourse that's going on in our country right now. I'd wonder if either one of you want to sort of just start the conversation by discussing where it is that you think all of this heated rhetoric is coming from, and why it is that we speak the way we do about politics in our country right now.
Matthew, would you like to start, or may I?
Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, I think the problem is that we're not having debates. I think of a debate as an argument in which people are at least nominally trying to get to the truth. And I think what we have is what I call tribalistic discourse. And I'm going to be shamelessly self-promoting here. This is my new book about tribalism. It's called Our Moral Fate, Evolution and the Escape from Tribalism. And if you look at the picture here, this is from 1937. It's a Nazi rally, and everybody is robotically giving the Nazi salute except one fellow. His name is August Landmesser, and he's standing there with his arms folded and a very skeptical look on his face. He's refusing to join the tribe, basically. I think that we're in a situation where we have tribalistic discourse, and this is much worse than polarization. Polarization is just deep differences of opinion about political matters, and you and I could have deep differences of opinion, but we could still respect each other and we could listen to each other. That's not what's going on with tribalistic discourse. Instead, what you're getting is what I call sorting and signaling. Tribalistic discourse is about sorting people into us versus them, denigrating them, elevating us, and it's about signaling one's loyalty to one's group. I think this is actually what happened with mask wearing or not wearing masks. I think that some people refuse to wear a mask as a kind of signal of their group identity, their loyalty to a particular group. So I think that it would be wonderful if we had debate, but instead debate has given way to this tribalistic discourse. And in tribalistic discourse, the point is not to seek the truth. As I said, it's sorting and signaling. There's something else about tribalistic discourse that's very disturbing, and that is it presents these conflicts as all linked together in a kind of Armageddon scenario in which there's a contest for the highest stakes imaginable. And the conflict is viewed as what economists call zero sum. That is, what I gain, you lose. There is no middle ground. There is no common ground. There is no possibility of bargaining or compromise. And bargaining and compromise are essential to democracy. And that's why tribalism is such a threat to democracy.
And we'll have the link for your book, Dr. Buchanan, available right below our video from Amazon. And Matthew, would you like to speak about that? Where does this loss of common ground come from, or do you disagree?
Yeah, as someone who's trained as a rhetorician, of course, I'm always looking at the conditions that promote persuasion and helping people to, locate points of agreement, and obviously resort to violence indicate a breakdown in communication and the loss of common ground, and the breakdown in an ability to, in the belief at least, that one can persuade another with whom one does not agree. And the events at the Capitol on January 6th placed in stark relief kind of this unbridgeable chasm that seems to exist in American political discourse. And it's amazing how people missed the fact that event was brewing. I know there was one Israeli researcher, he's appeared on CNN a couple of times, who was predicting it on Twitter, and he was amazed at the fact that nobody else was picking up on the fact that this event was coming together on Twitter and in various underground locales. And sure enough, he nailed exactly how big of an event it was going to be. And so the ability to tap into resentment against elites, the ability, for example, of a demagogic figure like Trump to bridge this alienation that's felt in in the heartland and outside of the realm of coastal elites, and to position his supporters as being against the representatives in Washington, or those who live in San Francisco or New York, and the polarization of political discourse between Antifa and Black Lives Matter, between Antifa and the MAGA flag wavers. The ability to even find a common language to speak to those groups seems just impossible. And so in rhetoric we talk about identification, right? So how do we help people identify with one another? How do we identify points of commonality that'll help establish common ground? And in fact, if you try to bring people together who are separated by this unbridgeable chasm that I mentioned, you will in fact produce increased polarization, because each group tries to outflank the other in terms of the extremity of their positions, right? So that seems counterintuitive, right? You would think that people who are starkly divided along a political spectrum, that if you brought them together twice a month over coffee and had them discuss their political differences, you would think over time that they would find points of agreement, points of commonality. But in fact, what happens is that there is this cascade effect. And this is something that Cass Sunstein has talked about in his work, and David French's book, Divided We Fall, talks about this as well, that in fact, these extremist views don't find common ground at all. In fact, they push outward and produce increased polarization. And that's a really kind of maybe counterintuitive notion, but in fact, that's what French and Sunstein and other thinkers. Ezra Klein has written this book, Why Are We So Polarized? Ben Sass has looked at this phenomenon, and so it's really kind of inexplicable as to what's driving that process. And so French, for example, talks about how Latino Republicans will suppress their Latino identity to emphasize and embellish their Republican identity, right? Why would that be the case? Why would they suppress their ethnic identity to promote their Republicanness, so to speak, right? And we would assume, that there are very few Republicans who are African American, transgender, and promoters of sexual liberty. The caricature is that Republicans are stark defenders of the Second Amendment, that they are pro-marriage, opposite sex marriage, that they want to defend the marital institution. And we can run down the list of caricatures that we would associate with Democrats and Republicans. And that progressive conservative split is the governing, driving sort of divide in American political discourse.
So if I could ask you a question to sort of push back and maybe play devil's advocate a little bit, because I hear both of you, I think, quite reasonably talking about the need for more common ground, the need to sort of see eye to eye and start from a place of commonality. But I'd be interested to sort of hear both of your opinions on, Matt, you bring up Black Lives Matter, for instance, and a lot of that movement grew from a place of, we're sort of sick of trying to find common ground with the other side, right? We're sort of sick of trying to sort of temper our voices. And likewise, we see voices like, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, for instance, popping up in on the Democratic side of politics and sort of rejecting the concept of this sort of meeting in the middle and sort of throwing up their hands and saying, sort of enough is enough, it's time to take drastic action. Is it always something that we should lament in terms of a sort of a lack of common ground? Is it ever sometimes beneficial to kind of reject that moderate sense of debate and get into slightly more fiery rhetoric, or is it generally kind of a bad idea or unproductive to do that? Does that make sense?
Well, I think there's a a time when moderation is not appropriate, but I still think that if you're trying to act in a way that will really shake things up, you still have to try to reach common ground at some point, and you have to try to engage with the other as a reasonable being. And this is something that Matthew suggested a moment ago, I think is exactly right, and that is part of what's essential to this tribalistic mentality is viewing the other as literally unreasonable. You cannot reason with them. They're all either irretrievably stupid and misinformed, or they're irredeemably corrupt and perhaps even evil. Let me give a couple of quick examples, okay? Are you familiar with the term libtard, L-I-B-T-A-R-D? Okay,
Yes.
well, this is a way of branding all liberals or progressives as mentally deficient. Now, if they're really seriously mentally deficient, there's not a lot of point in trying to engage with them in political debate. The other strategy is to impugn the motives of the other, to view them as insincere. So again, there's no point in listening to them. And here's my example from Rush Limbaugh. Rush often says that Democrats don't really care about migrants. They just want open borders because they think migrants will vote Democratic. Now, this is very convenient because instead of engaging with the real issues about borders, you simply impugn the character of people who have a disagreement with you, and then you shut them out. You don't listen to them. And unfortunately, this doesn't just happen on the left, on the right. It happens also on the left. And I'm thinking of cases where there'll be an advertisement that someone's going to speak at a campus, and some activists organize and shout them down or create a security threat so that the event is canceled. And they do this by labeling the person as a racist or a sexist. Again, this is very convenient because you don't have to engage with the person. You don't even have to explain why you think they're a racist or a sexist. You just exclude them. You exclude them from the community of reasonable beings, beings that you have a responsibility to try to engage with and reason with. And I think this has happened across the board. I think it's just a tremendous breakdown in communication based on extremely negative views, not about so much about the content of what somebody's saying, but about the people who are saying it. There's been, this is, I know that Matthew is familiar with this, it's sort of ad hominem arguments writ large. That is, instead of engaging with what the content of what somebody's saying, you attack the person.
And yeah, Matthew, I know that this is certainly especially an area of your expertise, this concept of campus censorship and academic freedom of speech. Can we talk a little bit about that? I mean, it sounds like, Dr. Buchanan, you're talking about the tendency to sort of make arguments from ethos, right? To sort of just attack the credibility of a person prior to them even being able to make their points. Yeah, Matthew, if you'd like to sort of.
Yeah, I mean, Alan makes some great points about what's happened in the free speech debate on American college campuses, and people who take strong positions on free speech and the First Amendment are often accused of being First Amendment fundamentalists, which I think is maybe an unfortunate descriptor. So if you look at controversial speakers who come onto college campuses like Ben Shapiro and Charles Murray and Milo Yiannopoulos, and the violence that often ensues when these polarizing, controversial speakers come to say what they want to say, you often see students seeking to deplatform them, right? They don't even believe that they should have a space and a forum within which to articulate their viewpoints. And a question I often ask myself, and I ask students as well, how many of these students really have taken the time to actually read a book by Charles Murray or Ben Shapiro or any of a number of different thinkers that they're willing to deplatform? And of course, the answer to that is always, well, I don't need to read a book by a racist, a white supremacist, someone advocating for ethnic separatism. So there is this sense in which not only do I not need to read their book, but my campus shouldn't even expend resources to give them a platform. But a lot of times the views that these students have of these speakers, Charles Murray, of course, often associated with the book, The Bell Curve, and, its contentions about race and IQ have been contested and rebutted. It seems to me that they sort of lend lend credence to things that he might want to say by virtue of their eagerness, their zeal to deplatform him. If what he says is so utterly inane and stupid and racist, it'll be self-evident when he speaks, right? I mean, if we're really committed to open debate and open exchange of ideas, the best way to, quote, deplatform Charles Murray is to question him, right? And to present counter arguments and evidence that rebuts what he puts forward in his presentation. It's not to deplatform him or to, physically assault the organizer who brought him to campus. It's to rebut him in debate.
So the sort of sunlight is the best disinfectant kind of thing.
Sure, right, exactly. And so, Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt, have written this book, Coddling of the American Mind, and this whole notion of safe spaces and microaggressions has really, I think, done a disservice to the cause being pushed by progressives and people on the left, because it sort of suggests that they're not willing to do the hard work involved with actual debate and embracing free speech principles for those with whom they disagree. So I personally find myself agreeing with that coddling of the American mind descriptor.
So I could talk about this specific subject for hours and hours and hours. So I do have one follow-up question. Then I very quickly want to just talk a little bit about our political debates in terms of the way that our actual debates are formatted and structured. In terms of Republicans, Democrats, and our presidential debates. But I do want to ask one quick follow-up question, because I'm interested in the way that both of you are discussing sort of campus debates and suggesting the idea of student protests sometimes being in some ways a gut reaction, in some ways a sort of way of shutting down debate. But again, sort of going back to the specific wording of our resolution tonight, which is that the debates miss the mark. Kind of similar to my last question, putting aside maybe a Charles Murray or a Ben Shapiro, if there is a separation to be made, and bringing maybe a spotlight on someone like Milo Yiannopoulos, I think it would be fair to characterize Milo Yiannopoulos as specifically simply a troll, right? Is sort of his goal more than anything is to get a rise out of people, right? That there's not really necessarily, I would think, even an academic benefit to sort of hearing what he has to say. So I'm wondering if because what he's doing is so incendiary and so purposely incendiary, is our protests right back at him to say, we don't want to sort of hear what you have to say? Is that sort of incendiary rhetoric? Is that in any way sometimes a proportionate, at least, response back, or is that also sort of an area where you think that students are maybe overreacting or not allowing the best way to shut him down?
Well, I think if somebody's literally being incendiary, they're inciting to riot, then there are limits to free speech. But I think in many cases, the people that are being excluded are not going that far.
Sure.
Now, I mean, look, if somebody labels themselves as a Nazi, I'm not convinced that we need to listen to them. I think the Nazis had their day, and we know where that goes. But that's a really extreme case. Most people who have Nazi-like views don't proudly label themselves as Nazis. And there's always a tendency to sort of overinflate the Nazi label and apply it too promiscuously to anybody you don't like. Similarly with the label fascist. I think what you have to realize is that a lot of this what I call tribalistic response is about what you might call a belief immune system. That is, people are desperately hanging on to their beliefs, and they're afraid to voice any dissent within their own group because they'll be viewed as disloyal. And they have all sorts of mechanisms for shielding themselves from engaging with beliefs that disagree with theirs. And I think this is just toxic to democracy. And I think it's also, and I use this word advisedly, I think it's dehumanizing to view your opponent as literally unreasonable, as unable to reason. You cannot reason with them. They're either mentally deficient, they're libtards or whatever, or they're so totally corrupt and insincere that you can't believe a word that they say. If you exclude someone from the community of reasonable beings, beings that you can try to persuade, that you can try to engage with, try to find common ground, you are literally dehumanizing them, because we think of human beings as creatures who are capable of reasoning with each other.
Yeah, I remember John McWhorter, the linguist, saying that, you know, there are certain sort of topics or people who are sort of not worthy of engaging with, but the problem is that we're expanding the umbrella to sort of define that as far too large. But that concept of dehumanization, I think, is a perfect transition to sort of the last area I wanted to get into, and I'll throw this one over to you, Matthew, which is the dehumanizing of politicians themselves to their opponents. I feel like right now we're hearing so many calls for bipartisanship that feel hollow in a lot of ways. So I'm wondering, how do you get the feeling, Matthew, and I'll turn back to you, Alan. Do you get the feeling that the electorate right now is hungry more for bipartisanship, or are they sort of hungry for this more reactive kind of dig your heels into your side kind of politics? I mean, what do the people want? Are the politicians giving the people what they want, or are the people just sort of taking their cues from the politicians?
Yeah,
I'm not.
that's go ahead, Alan. Yeah.
Matthew, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that's a great question. I mean, these calls for bipartisanship, strike me as rather empty. People kind of like that, the gut politics of Trump. Whatever you can say about Trump, I think he, helped clarify, in many ways, people's core political beliefs, and he moved the needle, so to speak, on what one can articulate in public life, and still enjoy a successful political career. And you think of every time that he moved beyond what we thought was allowable. It just and one of the amazing things is Trump's success among Christian evangelicals, right? How do you explain the fact that a philandering billionaire who's was never religious has found such a place in the hearts of white Christian evangelicals, whereas someone like George W. Bush didn't even enjoy the same levels of support as Trump? And so what has changed? How do we explain that historical shift to where Trump's amorality can be justified and apologized for? He's just this King David figure who has is advancing God's goals, even though we may not agree with the faults of the man. And a lot of Christian evangelicals have talked about him in that way. And then it's just a remarkable renunciation of the political norms of American culture in the last 5 years since he came on the national political scene in the way he did. So yeah, I really think that the calls to bipartisanship strike me as hollow.
I think it's a good point, because there I think we're mixing the concept of religion and politics and rhetoric, right? And I think that all of those three things tend to go hand in hand and weirdly get mixed up, and that is part of what usually sort of muddles our debate.
Oh,
right?
Sorry, I lost you.
Oh, that's okay.
My computer just blanked out for a moment. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I think there is an explanation of this remarkable phenomenon that Matthew pointed out, the evangelical Christians getting on board with Trump. And that is, I think if you believe that we're in a sort of Armageddon situation or a supreme emergency, then you'll be willing to make allies with anybody that you think is on your side. I remember Churchill's remark when he started engaging with the Soviet Union as an ally after Operation Barbarossa, when the Germans invaded. And someone said to him, well, you've always hated the Soviets. You tried to strangle the Soviet regime in its cradle. What's up? And he said, look, if Hitler invaded hell, I would make an alliance with the devil. Well, I think this is exactly what's going on. I think when you're in this supreme emergency mode of thinking, everything is connected in a huge Armageddon. It's a contest for the highest stakes imaginable. Then you're willing to bend all of your moral rules, throw out your scruples, do things you would never do if you didn't think that it was a zero-sum contest for the highest stakes imaginable. And people have, partly by being in these echo chambers on the internet, right? And Matthew alluded to this, when people have the same political views and only associate with people who have similar views, the views become more and more extreme because there's no touchstone of reality to it. There's no dissenting voice. Dissenting voices are viewed as disloyal, as traitors. They're banned, they're excluded from the group. So I think once you get into that frame of mind, that supreme emergency Armageddon, you will do all sorts of things you would never contemplate doing, and you will embrace somebody like Donald Trump, even if you're a believing Christian.
Yeah, and which goes back to the tribalism we were speaking about before. This was really great. Are there any thoughts that our panelists would like to leave our debaters with and our audience with before we dive into our debate proper?
Well, a couple of points, if I may. One, I think that what I've referred to as tribalism is rooted in our evolved moral psychology. I think that there's always going to be a tendency for humans to sort of divide the world into us and them and think more highly of us than of them. But the extreme form of tribalism can be combated. But what it's going to require is changing people's incentives. People have got to have incentives to listen to each other and to bargain and compromise. And I think to do that in our system would require some significant institutional changes. For example, having more than two parties. If you have a number of parties, people have to build coalitions across disagreements. They have to come together and bargain and compromise. Another possibility would be, and this I don't think is going to happen, switching to proportional representation, because again, that requires people to build coalitions and cooperate with people they disagree with. And the last thing, which may sound strange, would be using supermajority rule for some decisions. Because when you have the supermajority rule, you have to recruit people from the other side to get enough votes. I think the idea is we've got to change our environment to give people incentives to cooperate and to listen to each other. But I don't know if we can do this because I think actually all of this is driven by fear and resentment. And I don't know how you're going to get at that. I know the Democrats have failed to get at the resentment of white guys that feel disempowered by women's liberation and civil rights and tread upon by the global economy. The Democrats have completely ignored that. They've only focused on people who are in historically disadvantaged groups. And they basically said, well, tough luck for you other people, right? The white guy's pain doesn't matter. That's a huge mistake because in a democracy, you can't take those people you disagree with and shoot them. They're going to be there. And somebody will feed their resentment. And that's exactly what Trump did.
You know, one of the protesters who has been, shown on TV over and over again was this man who said the government did this to us. We were law-abiding, tax-paying citizens, and we're here because you did this to us. And that was really a remarkable statement that was sort of emblematic of a lot of the anger and resentment that came to the fore on January 6th. And, Alan's colleague, Barbara Herrnstein-Smith at Duke, has said that the dynamics of, intellectual controversy, and I think that this would also apply to the dynamics of public discourse, mirror quite closely the dynamics of larger human conflict. And I really think, just understanding how political debate mirrors human aggression more broadly is, you can appreciate then why propaganda and the simplicity of a political message, it taps into our primordial instincts and it primes us to fight just as we do in a physical fight. So something to think about.
It sounds like you read my book, Matthew.
I haven't read your book, but I'm going to go buy it right now.
I was just going to say, we had the Closing the American Mind in the 80s. We had the Coddling the American Mind. I'm hoping that Alan and Matthew are going to get together and write the third installment of this series. This was excellent. As soon as this pandemic is over, Matthew and Alan, I'll take you out. We'll get a drink and we'll continue this conversation. Thank you so much. Appreciate you very, very much for coming and being our guest speakers. Hopefully, we are going to be able to come to some common ground and demonstrate for everyone viewing how it is that we can have these political debates this evening. Matthew and Alan, you are welcome to hang out and stay and watch our debaters. You're welcome to head out whenever you'd like. But thank you so much again for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that said, let's go ahead and move to our debate proper. Just to remind everybody, again, our resolution this evening is just that: America's political debates miss the mark. Please, again, vote before our debate, before you hear any of our speakers speak, based solely on how it is that you're hearing that resolution, how it strikes your ear. Do you believe affirmatively or negatively, or are you unsure on the resolution that America's political debates miss the mark? Please vote now, and a vote again, of course, after we're all finished. And the winners of tonight's debates will be based on who ends up persuading the audience the most, and we will announce those winners in 2 weeks at our next debate. Let's go ahead and introduce our debaters and move straight to our opening round of speakers. Our opening round, speaking for the affirmative, on the side of the affirmative that suggests that America's political debates do indeed miss the mark, we have Daniel Joffrey.
Thank you very much, Ted. And another thank you to both of our guest speakers. I loved watching the conversation. I only wish I could have partaken in it myself. So, getting us started. Regardless of how you might have felt about them, I think we can all agree that the last few years have forced us to pay at least some attention to politics. Last year alone, policy proposals and partisan talking points completely dominated the 24-hour news cycle and dining room tables alike, as we all watched the presidential election play out. And after everything that happened between the Senate race, the presidential election, and the Supreme Court impeachment, I think we can all agree that the way our country conducts its public political debates is deeply flawed. Of course, just because something is flawed doesn't mean that it doesn't work or can't be useful. But in this case, I believe that the way in which politicians and the media approach our public political debates is keeping it from hitting the mark. So, of course, the obvious question to ask is, what exactly would it mean for a debate to hit the mark? Well, some might argue that this would mean that the debate was effective at convincing listeners of a point or persuading potential voters to choose a specific candidate, something which our debates arguably are effective at. After all, according to the Pew Research Center, roughly 10% of voters make up their minds because of public debates, a rather impressive number considering that only between 15 to 24% of voters usually haven't made up their minds by 2 months out from the election. However, if the only important factor is persuasiveness, then why don't we just listen to politicians make their speeches and then just make our decisions accordingly? What exactly does a debate add to the process? The difference between speech and debate is that you have to examine the issue fully from both sides. As an audience, we are made better educated on a doctrine or policy by being exposed not just to the arguments in favor of it, but to its shortcomings. And that is what I would define as hitting the mark for a debate. That by the time it ends, the audience has been left better informed, that they've gained some understanding about a doctrine or policy, about its benefits and risks, its costs and promises, and they can make a decision on their own based on that broader information. Unfortunately, more and more often, this isn't what we're seeing from our public political debates. Instead of attempting to win over voters based on merits of their policy, we're increasingly seeing our politicians focus on partisan talking points, trying to turn the issue into one that is purely red versus blue. Now, this isn't anything explicitly wrong with turning something into a binary issue. It makes it easier to discuss the issue if you limit the number of involved perspectives to a palatable and easy to understand number. Now, the issue arises when the main merits of an argument are portrayed as not coming from the argument, but from the person making it. I'm sure that by now all of you are familiar with the kind of talking points I'm referring to, things which try to push the focus away from the issue and towards the supposed virtues of the side making the argument, or the demerits of the side fighting it. In case you haven't, or missed our opening introductions from our speakers, a good example of this would be the first question of the 2020 presidential debate. In it, the moderator asks each debater to justify their position regarding appointing a new Supreme Court justice so close to the election, breaking precedent, and what direction they thought this addition would take the court. In his response, now President Biden said that he was worried about the future of the Affordable Care Act, to which former President Trump responded by calling the ACA socialism and President Biden and the entire Democratic Party socialists. And whether or not you watch the debate, I'm sure this is something that we've all heard before, as an objection to a healthcare proposal, to pandemic relief, to education funding. But what this kind of objection do? It doesn't tell us anything about the proposal. Even if we question whether or not something is socialism, or even if that is a bad thing, it hasn't actually answered any questions about the topic at hand. Calling a policy or a politician socialist doesn't tell us anything about the costs and benefits of the policy. Instead, it's done as a signal that the other side is wrong. Socialism equals bad. The other side is good because we're against socialism. The argument doesn't engage honestly with the topic at hand, and it doesn't do anything to educate the audience to prove the merits of the point. And even if it can be persuasive, so long as our politics continues to favor these kinds of bad faith arguments, our public political debates just are going to continue missing this mark. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And opening up the negative side of the resolution that America's political debates missed the mark, we have Anna Smith.
Hi, my name's Benna. I'm going to be arguing in favor of the neg today. Huge thank you to our speakers today. That was really great to hear. All right. We believe that America's political debates have not missed the mark. The foundations and organization of America's debate forum are stable and productive. America's political sphere is unique and because of a clear divide of two major parties, Democrat and Republican. The clear division in our politics is beneficial to our debate forum because first, it increases voter participation. According to Alexander Cohen of The Conversation in March 2020, particularly among voters with little political knowledge, party identification simplifies voting. A voter might know nothing about candidates on election day, but can use their party identification to make a reasonable decision. By making the voting process so simple, you make it easy for young and new voters to participate in political discourse. This increases viewpoints in debate and overall political knowledge. But while there's a plethora of information from the discourse between all of these voters, there's second, a streamlined process that makes discourse and compromise possible. Cohen continues, with two major parties of similar views and of approximately equal strength competing for control of a government, it is possible for governmental control to alternate between the parties without shifts in policy so radical as to incite minorities to resistance. Because of this stable, moderate-leaning two-party system, those on opposite sides of the political spectrum can compromise to an alternation of parties as well as work side by side well enough. But this is a game of risk in that these parties must also be able to appeal to their less moderate supporters. Robert Giebelhoff writes in September 2016 for the Washington Post that American voters are directly involved in building the coalitions that are the Democrat and Republican parties in a way that voters in parliamentary systems aren't. It's called primary elections. Besides, what's a Republican anyway? Does Rand Paul share the same political ideology of Lindsey Graham or Ted Cruz or Donald Trump? Of course not. If you really study the Republican political party, you'll quickly realize that it's made of just a bunch of overlapping subparties tentatively put together. We've seen liberals show their ideological diversity this election thanks in large part to Bernie Sanders. They've put together a grand coalition of leftist ideologues, but this coalition can be just as easily broken up given the right political issue. Think healthcare, education subsidies, free trade, or finance regulations. Because of the way America's political system is organized, debate is easily categorized into just enough major groups that discourse is simple, but a million topics can be debated within these parties themselves. However, the larger group is there so that these subgroups can still compromise in order to create actual policy from all of this discourse. Our second point is that America's debates have been productive, starting with the presidential debates. According to Denise Ardway of Harvard on September 22nd, 2020, viewing presidential debates boosts voters' feelings of confidence in their own political knowledge, especially for voters who felt less informed before the debate. In this manner, the researchers explain, campaign debates serve as something of an equalizer among the political information haves and have-nots. The way our politics boil down to two main sides make a one-on-one debate possible. This process inspires voters to become more politically active and produce more discourse on an individual level. At its worst, these debates are clashful, but due to the one-on-one nature, this too is a positive in disguise. This clash strongly increases viewership. Arbani de Stewart and Vanderberg find in 2016 that increased sensationalism is greatly considered an efficient strategy in increasing the battle for an audience. This large audience is hugely beneficial, as Carlin writes for CNN. In 2016, 2 of the 3 Clinton matchups are set at an all-time debate viewership records, with the first drawing a total of 84 million viewers. Many studies reveal that viewers gain important information from debates. Our reviews of hundreds of focus group transcripts since 1992 shows that every group had members who say they learned something new. Knowledge gained from debates by first-time and leaning but not committed voters increases confidence in their choice and may even influence their decision to go to the polls at all. Overall, America's debates are well-structured, simple, widely viewed and participated in, and thus they have absolutely not missed the mark.
Thank you very much, Bennett. Great, let's move on to our second round, which again is going to consist of my questions and our debaters addressing each other, but it's also going to consist of your questions who are viewing. So please make sure that you ask questions on our questionnaire right underneath the live stream that we have right now, and fill out the Google questionnaire, and we'll read them in a little bit. But first, let me throw a question of my own over to the affirmative based on something the negative just said. One of the things that it sounds like the negative is contending is that the bipolarity, the sort of right-left spectrum that we have in America, we so often sort of argue on, it actually makes debate manageable, right? That it actually makes it so that we can more easily digest the myriad sort of issues by looking at it as these 2 different sides who are talking to each other. Can you talk a little bit about why, whether or not you agree with that? If you don't agree, why don't you agree? And if you do, then what's wrong with that concept of this sort of right-left polarization?
Would you like me to take that?
Either one.
Hi, can I be heard?
Yeah, go. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, sorry, I was having some technical. Issues.
Can we hear you, or are you allowed to be heard?
Oh well, both.
Yes, both. Yes.
I get 2 yeses. Okay. Yeah. I think it depends. We really need to be careful to stick to the way that we defined our terms here, because the neg is doing a good job making it sound like the effectiveness and hitting the mark of a debate is to make the constituents have more confidence in what their beliefs are. When I make a decision or I form a belief, my goal is to make that decision based on information, not based on having been deceived or led by master rhetoricians to believe what is ultimately going to get them to follow you.
So you're suggesting there's a certain manipulation rather than sort of goal to inform on the part of politicians and public speakers.
Right, and in that way, it is neither a true debate as it was, as we defined and as actually one of our guest speakers defined, as something that's seeking truth. It's not seeking truth, it's seeking outcome. And it's seeking to train the constituents in many cases.
Great, let's hear a response from the negative on that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I don't really think that the goal of a debate is necessarily to completely change one's mind from being a Republican to a Democrat or opposite. There's a lot more that happens in a debate other than trying to change someone's mind. And one thing is just educating viewers in general. And I think that's something great that happens with our presidential debates. You have huge amounts of viewers who, and Daniel says that most of them have already made up their mind on who they're about to vote for. But the thing that's good is that they're learning a lot of information and they're learning the real sides behind these people and who they're going to have in office, which is a benefit on its own, even if no one's really changing their mind.
Just to add to that, if I may, a lot of the information that we get is from the media, and it helps to have these real people who are standing for election speak in conjunction with the media so that we can see both sides of this, the spectrum and the policy issue being debated.
If I can respond? I do want to touch on a point that was just recently made. I believe that the negative is right in this. The goal in going into a debate is not to suddenly make a Republican realize that their values have been misplaced and they should become a Democrat. It's not to make a Democrat learn that their values have been misplaced and they should become a Republican. It is, as I believe the AF has defined it, or at least alluded to it in our statement, education on the issues, on the substance of the policy, to allow the individual, the audience, we watching at home, to know what is happening with a system of beliefs, with a policy. There is, like as I said before, nothing inherently wrong with making that a binary discussion. We have so many disparate groups and beliefs, and consolidating them to have a direct conversation is, if not the best for providing viewpoints to everyone, makes it the easiest to consume and to understand. The problem is with, as Dr. Buchanan said, it's this tribalistic dialogue, this rhetoric, these motivist arguments, where the motivations you ascribe to people act as a proxy for what their argument are. We have these talking points, again, if you call somebody a Nazi, if you call somebody a socialist, that stands in for their argument. It becomes an attack on them. You don't have, I believe your policy is wrong because of its source of funding, because of its solvency. It becomes, your policy is wrong because you have the wrong beliefs, because you're making it for the wrong reasons. And that can be convincing. It's very convincing even knowing that it's coming, but it doesn't tell you anything about the policy. It can make you confident in your choice. You're voting for the right person because that person isn't a Nazi, or that person isn't a socialist, but you haven't learned anything.
So I want to let the negative respond and make one last comment to that, and then I'll move on to my next question. But I do want to give the negative a chance to respond.
Yeah, I don't think that those things are like necessarily just true about America's political debate sphere at all. That's about human nature in general. That's not like very resolutional in that we are just arguing if America's political debates are leaning one way or the other, not necessarily if human nature is making people form these tribes, because that's just going to happen regardless.
It's hard, if not nearly impossible, to remove people from their natural biases, and that's what you, Daniel, are necessarily talking about, that people tend to attack other people. Tribalism is necessarily a primitive concept that we have as a result of moral and social evolution. It's not necessarily tied just to America's political debate sphere, as Benna said. And while that is, it's more of a inherent human issue that we have to work through as a society to evolve from. It's not necessarily tied to our debate. Yeah.
So let me throw my follow-up question, my next question over to the negative, since I started with the affirmative. I think that I wouldn't be sort of speaking out of turn, as we certainly just saw with our two distinguished guest speakers, that there is, I think, a resounding sentiment right now, at least in our country, that discourse is particularly heated, right? So I'd love to sort of hear from the negative, if there is anything that if the fact that we have such heated discourse, do you think that damages your argument that we're not missing the mark? I mean, does it feel as though that particular divisive rhetoric, does that still sort of align with your definition of the productive discourse?
Do you want me to? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if anything, having a heated debate only makes people want to participate in it more, and I think that's a benefit. I think that I mean, if it was boring, people wouldn't want to pay attention to politics, and that's, I think, why people watch the presidential debate, because there is a lot of heat and clash, I guess, and it's just an interesting thing to watch. I mean, it might be a little bit sensationalized, but that's what brings viewership, and that's going to be overall good for everyone.
That's also a good gauge of how involved people are in these issues and how passionate about these issues they are. So I think that definitely bolsters our argument, if anything, Ted.
Yeah, and let me hear the affirmative. What say you to that? I mean, it does certainly engage people. It does certainly get them watching.
If I can take this one, Sam. So the way I would respond to that, because I think this actually ties into the last point they made before we moved on to this question. Again, there is nothing inherently wrong with things being heated, with people being passionate in a vacuum. But again, there is a difference between human nature, the things that we are instinctively passionate about, the way we instinctively think of things and handle controversy and opposition, and the way that an argument is made. It is not heat from the sun, it's a stove, it's controlled, it's planned. So the problem, at least in like a public political sphere, when you see all these heated things happening, is that it's a tactic. It's a choice. It's not getting heated due to passion. It's getting heated because that's the direction that the Redders are trying to take it, by changing the focus to make things inflammatory, like we talked about. For example, I believe Ted Myonopoulos is attempting to actively make things inflammatory. It's not people being passionate, it's the person steering the conversation away from productivity, away from substance, and towards these issues which muddy the waters and draw lines without informing people of anything other than where those lines have been drawn. So I believe the fact that they're heated isn't a problem, but the reason why they're heated and the way these fans are being flamed is part of why we're missing the mark on this.
I'd love to hear that from the negative. It sounds like the affirmative is sort of arguing here that the citizens themselves are not demanding this kind of rhetoric, or not necessarily naturally kind of come up with this rhetoric, that they're sort of being encouraged or invoked to be heated. Would you say that that's true?
Do you want to say something? You can go.
You can go.
Okay, yeah. I don't think that that's necessarily true, that everyone is heated because they want to like invoke people's, like, I don't know, whatever, like Milo Yiannopoulos. Like, I don't think that that's true, that everyone is like that and that your average citizen is going to be like that. I think that the majority of people that are engaging in debates and political debates are passionate about the issue they're debating about. I wouldn't go out and I want to have a debate with someone who is just trolling me. I don't think that anyone really would. So I don't really think that actually happens that much. I think that those are just people on Twitter streams and stuff that aren't actually engaging in debate with people.
And just to add to that, the very nature of politics calls for people to be taking sides, right? And people in and of themselves have multiple goals and multiple ways of reaching these goals. But the reason we have this divided political party system is so that there's a clear demarcation and people can identify. In a country that is this big, there's no possible way of reaching a common goal that's somewhat of a compromise on all sides unless you have this identification with parties. Also, Daniel, I might be wrong in what I understood, but I don't believe that as human beings, any conversations we engage in take place in a vacuum, and that's where human passions and biases play in. We are politically charged creatures, and that ties back to the very nature of politics lending itself to debate. And that's why we believe debate is an effective platform for people to be engaging in these issues.
Let's hear a response from the affirmative.
There is one thing that I think we might be on a little bit of separate pages that I think like it would be good, like at least to clarify, to see where we both stand. What you said in that rebuttal is that there's the reason there's nothing inherently wrong with these, like the two-party systems, is because that is how sides fall. We consolidate into parties because it helps block in ideologies and allow us to understand what's happening. And I've agreed in prior statements. There is nothing, at least for the purposes of this debate, wrong with having things like that. The issue I am saying is the reason why this polarization of like tribes misses the mark is because it changes the benchmarks for how the debate is conducted. The debate is not merely here is parties A's idea and here is parties B's idea, which one is better. The way that this tribalistic rhetoric engages with that point is to shift it from the merits of that to simply saying our side is better simply because it is our side. if we prove that this idea can be put under the blanket of our side, by default you should like it. By default you should prefer it. And that, like, again, that doesn't help educate people. It does not tell you what the costs of a policy will be. It doesn't tell you what the gains for different kinds of people, what the detriments to different people will be. It only tells you that it is the position of a certain side. So this goes to, like, what are our benchmarks for hitting the mark? What I've tried to argue is that hitting the mark is leaving people informed about what they're choosing between. And when you push an argument to be purely partisan in this tribalistic manner, you're not educated on the issue, you're only educated on the sides of the issue.
I have, I'll allow the negative to give one last response to that, and then I have some excellent audience questions that have just come in because people seem to be very engaged with what it is you guys are talking about. So, Neg, if you want to sort of just give a last comment, and then I'm going to throw my first question over to the affirmative.
Yeah, well, again, I think that sort of, like, their side is worse just because they're their side and our side's better because it's ours. That's just human behavior. I don't think that has anything to do with America's political debate forum. And additionally, I think that you're forgetting that there are like groups within those parties as well, right? That's why we have primary elections, and that's why we have primary debates as well, right? You want these people who have like little niche different ideas to be able to debate and it boil up in a very systematic way. And it's shown in our government that it's done a pretty good job. We've had pretty smooth transitions of power and people are in agreement with that sort of thing.
Just to add to that, if I may, Ted, just last comment. Yeah, thank you. It's hard. I think it's nearly impossible, in fact, for us as humans to disengage from the idea of tribalism. It's happened as a social evolutionary tactic, just demarcating that us versus them for protective reasons mainly. So I don't think that we can necessarily disengage from that tribalistic nature. Also, what Benna and I are trying to argue here tonight is that debate as a platform, by allowing citizens of this country to see what particular people are standing for, it allows us to know what side we want to vote for. So if I am hearing a president elect or candidate standing for election saying what their views are, I'm better informed about the topic. And this kind of trickles down into everyday conversation, what I'm talking to my roommates about, what I'm talking to my family about, what I'm talking to people maybe on social media about. So I do think it definitely contributes to information in that way.
So let me throw my first audience question here over to the affirmative and allow you guys to highlight some things. I know that one thing that the negative seems to be talking a lot is sort of highlighting the concept of America being a very specific word in this resolution. So the first audience question that we have here is, have America's political debates ever hit the mark? In other words, is this something that were our debates once productive and that there's something that's going on in our culture now that has shifted it? Or is the suggestion here that America's political debates have sort of never been able to sort of function in the way that you on the AF are suggesting it could or should?
We're suggesting that, well, at least my belief is that we've never hit the bullseye, but we've gotten further away from the mark over time as the system has gotten more complex.
And why is that, Sam? What is it in the culture or that has sort of, in your opinion, moved us further away from the bullseye, as you say?
I think the growth and evolution of our culture is probably tied to that. I think, you know, the founding fathers were very proper and everyone walked around in their suits all day. You know, and I think there was probably a greater sense of decency or maybe not, but different standards at the time for cultures and
Sure.
for the guys back then. Now, the people running our political system and our political debates are businessmen. Their goal is to win for themselves. I think that's more so the case than it was with the founding fathers, and that we've seen that take place over time.
So a sort of a sense of civic duty that has been lost, in other words, that you're suggesting here.
Yeah, corrupted.
Okay. Daniel, do you want to jump on that? Because your opponents have the benefit of sitting next to each other and are able to sort of
A little bit.
One-two punch. But go ahead, Daniel, if you want to.
So the idea, like part of this being unique to America, and if we've ever hit it, like again, I do kind of want to agree. As the neg has been said, like it is human nature to behave in certain ways. However, if you look at what the point of a debate would be, the arguments that are made to take advantage of this, to take advantage of human nature to obscure these points, have grown more prevalent. They've grown more divisive. This has happened like more and more over time. Like, for example, Brett O'Donnell was a professional debate consultant for the Republican Party. He worked on the Bush, McCain, and Romney campaigns. His main focus was teaching debaters how to do pivots, how to answer other questions and avoid the question the moderator had asked them. And by their estimate, politicians on both sides of the aisle by 2012 were pivoting on 60 to 70% of questions to some degree that they were asked. Now, I don't have the statistics immediately on hand for what these might have been in prior years from other sources, but we've seen, by example, different questions that are asked, we're getting farther and farther away from answers and more towards talking points. Now, specifically for America's political system, it's difficult to rein in what people say and how they're allowed to say because of the way our First Amendment operates. They have the purview to say what is their viewpoint or their projected viewpoint. But that doesn't make it constructive. That doesn't mean that it's hitting the point because they're saying what people want to hear or what they feel they should say. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, listen, no, I think that it satisfies me. I don't know if it satisfies our audience member who asked, but I'll let the negative respond very quickly if they want to, and then our next question is for the negative themselves.
I'm just going to respond to Sam real quick. America, admittedly, was built on not the most inclusive principles, and this interplay of cultural evolution or devolution, whatever you want to call it, this cultural change has led to us having our first vice president of color, our first female vice president. I definitely think that Sam's point does have some merit to it, yes, but I also think that just because we exist in these times, we have more information on how corrupt, I guess you could say, the system currently is. So I think there's definitely an information asymmetricity thing happening there when we don't exactly have the best information on previous times to make, I guess, a moral judgment about that.
So the suggestion there being that the transparency of the political system now and how much we know about it makes us sort of assume that corruption is rampant only because we didn't necessarily know. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then to respond to Daniel's point about pivoting, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that, like, generally politicians know what their constituents want to hear about, which I don't think is a bad thing either. I think that, like, people want to hear about the main points, right? And people want to have more knowledge on those. So I think if they're, like, shifting away from a question, it's not necessarily a bad thing. You can't just generalize all pivots to be, like, negative, because I do think that they are probably trying to, like, give their viewer more knowledge about their own, like, positions. Like, that's their whole goal of the debate.
Any response from before we turn to our next audience question for the next?
I could give like a brief clarification, like my position on pivoting to address Benna.
Yeah, as briefly as you can, because we just got a new batch of audience questions.
Very briefly, I did overgeneralize to an extent. However, the kind of pivots I mean by these, for the information that's being given, you're saying they're trying to address key topics, important topics. A lot of the time, like with these pivots, some of them will answer a question in the framework of another question, and that does provide detail. But a lot of them will ignore the question that's being given when it doesn't mesh with the image they're trying to project. For example, in the 2004 debate between Bush and Kerry, Bush was asked a question about the jobs crisis, dropping job numbers, and he pivoted towards talking about the No Child Left Behind program, which he considered to be a success. Now, yes, there's information on education programs there, but the question asked, the question that we're supposed to get information on, was jobs, which there was no information given for.
Let me, well, I'd love to hear follow-up to that. Let me ask our next audience question. We have a whole bunch. I have only 2 that we have time for. My next one's going to be over for the negative. One of the questions we got in here, which I assumed was going to come up, is you said before earlier that the heated rhetoric often gets people interested. Question here is there ever a point where that goes too far, where that heated rhetoric can actually do the opposite and actually turn people off rather than get them interested and sort of make people less interested and less engaged in politics and maybe less likely to vote?
Yeah, completely. I think that probably happens like a lot. But I don't think that on balance, that means that America's political debates are trending that way. I think that the passion and stuff shows that people are just really interested in this. And I mean, new people are joining, are trying to get government roles all the time because they're interested in joining the government. There's a huge boom right now of people wanting to do that. I think that just goes to show that people aren't as necessarily interested in engaging with this rhetoric, and I think that's true. But I think that overall trend is that people are becoming more able to have these actual debates.
So it does happen, but it's not. There's no sort of pandemic of that happening.
Yeah, I guess so.
Right.
Okay.
And if I may just add to that, it also kind of bolsters the idea of transparency within debates, just debate as a forum within the political system, to show that there are real people who are passionate about these issues. And I'm sure just because of, again, just, I know we've reeled back to this a lot, just the nature, I guess how human nature functions. Yes, there are times where this might tip over, but on the whole, it's just beneficial to our system.
Faruna, if you want to respond.
Sam, do you have anything first?
Go ahead, Daniel.
All right. Going off of this, I certainly agree. There is a point, a threshold where a lot of the fiery rhetoric gets out of hand. Whether or not the main topic should be on how it suppresses the votes, I think might be a variable, but there are definitely times where you see apathy generated from that. The thing that I see as the main issue here with when rhetoric gets too fiery, when it becomes too divisive or motivist, is that it shuts down debate as an exchange of ideas. You see conflict, you see clashes of ideas, but you don't see parties entering with the same willingness to consider the points. It feeds into like the kind of rhetoric that I've been discussing throughout this, and then we got from Professor Abraham and Dr. Buchanan beforehand, where it becomes these hyper partisan echo chambers being clashed against each other, and you don't have one side willing to listen to the other. Because when things get so loud, when things get so heated, I don't want to hear what the Nazi has to say. Nazi can say anything. Nazi can use any facts and logics he wants. I'm not going to pay attention. On the other side,
I just want to reiterate the origin of the question, because we're getting a little bit away from it right now, and I'd love to actually part of the question comes from Frank Sheeter, so I'd love to actually hear Sam's thought on this, which is just again sort of the question of how is it that tribalism and bipolarity, how are they in any way productive? And that was a question originally for the negative, but Sam, you can weigh in on that as well. And I'm sure the answer would be they're not.
I think it's productive in achieving the goals of our politicians, and I think we can see to the neg that it's productive in creating a system that is accessible to every single constituent better. But the only way that it's able to do that is by using tribalistic discourse and not having a true debate. It wouldn't be manageable to have a true debate that could get the level of engagement that we now see and now need and would like to maintain and grow.
Negative, quick response, and then I have one last audience question for the affirmative, and then we'll move to closing statements.
I think throughout this debate, what the AF has done so often is separate the ideas of politics and debate as a platform. A genuine question that the NEG has for the affirmative side is, what way of delivering political ideas would you say does hit the mark, or is more effective and productive, or however you may define hitting the mark? What way is more that than debate?
Can I actually jump off of that comment, just because that actually is very similar to our final audience question, which is which says the affirmative, you've done a very good job of letting us know what's sort of wrong with the system. How would you fix it? I mean, how would we sort of improve it, and what can we do to get us to hit the mark a little bit more?
I have an idea. I think integrity and a choice to be honest of our politicians and our media, if they were to come forward and say, look, we do this in a way that is in performative. That's the way we view it. We study strategies. We study what's going to resonate with people and be convincing and work against our opponents. So instead of only giving their constituents that piece, also casting more light on facts and on the importance of actually using those facts to make your decisions, alongside, if you choose to be influenced by the performative piece as well, then you have more to go off of, more data to actually make it a true decision and not just to be influenced.
Daniel, anything to add on that?
Yes. Again, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with the medium of debate, the binary of it, or even if there's more than two people at the table. It helps get ideas across by looking at them from multiple sides. The thing that we've been saying is wrong is how it's approached. So the fix would be to look for a different form of integrity, a different form of intellectual approach to these conversations. In the format would need to be made clear to people who are going to be engaging. The moderators would have to clamp down on the kind of rhetorics that's used, and via a form of incentives or simply how the debates are going to be built and structured, we would need to find a way to push a focus onto substance. You can still have charismatic speakers. There can still be some performative nature to a piece, but we need to push the focus of a debate to being the actual subject matter of the issues addressed, rather than what various stances say about the credibility or the perception of the sides making those arguments. It's a shift in focus and attention.
And negative, last comment to wrap up our second round, and we'll move to closing statements.
Mm-hmm. Of course, this sounds very cynical of me, but I don't believe that changing the medium of delivery, which over here we're talking about debate, is going to change the integrity of political actors. I think, just to reiterate what we've been saying, debate so far has proved to be productive. Yes, of course, there is room for improvement, as there always is. And Benna and I, the negative, believe that we should stick with this format and work on improving it rather than overhaul the system.
Yeah, and also I want to add that, like, the app is acting like there's just always this rhetoric going on in every single debate that you're watching. But I mean, I'm sure you guys all watched the presidential debates, and I just don't think that the whole time they were like, Donald Trump is a bad man, right, because of this. They were, like, even if they were yelling at each other, they were still talking about the real points. Like, even if for a small segment they were using some sort of rhetoric, they were still hitting those points.
Thank you very much. Anything the affirmative would like to say in response to that, you're more than welcome to say in your closing statements. Thank you guys very much for a spirited round two. Again, I'm going to remind the audience that after we're done with closing statements, you are more than welcome to, in fact, encouraged to vote for which side you believe has made the stronger argument. Hopefully, we won't have very many undecideds by the end. And that said, let's go ahead and move to our closing statements, and let's start off as we usually do by letting the affirmative for the side in favor of the idea that America's political debates miss the mark, which is Mr. Sam Sheeter.
Thanks, Ted. I'm going to start off and I'm going to give an example because I haven't given any yet. And I'm going to rebut Benna with the example. So yeah, they're not sitting there the whole time blatantly using strategies against you, right? That they wouldn't be a very good strategy if that was the way that people viewed it. But a good example that I use when I analyze political rhetoric is the level of complexity of speech that they use. So Donald Trump was a master. He was the best we've seen so far at creating an image of cult that appealed to cult constituents, and that got us as divided as we are. And he did it by speaking on a third grade level. I don't think he's stupid. I think when he's talking to his buddy on the golf course, he probably uses bigger words. But his choice to use small words throughout his whole administration is a pretty good example of how good the strategy works. I mean, because people don't know that. So now I'm going to run through just basically our main points. The point of debate is to educate the audience. We all conceded that. The lovely expert professor from Duke started this whole thing off with that. And I think that's true. And to educate is to aim to inform. Merely drawing party lines and attacking the other tribe doesn't do anything to educate anyone in a substantive way. So it keeps the system running, but it's not aiming to educate. It's not a debate. Secondly, by pushing the focus of an argument away from substance, I'm double making this point, but you prevent the audience from truly being educated. Now I'm going to recap a couple points that I thought of during this debate. The debates we have in America are inherently missing the mark. Like we're trying to say, as they haven't met the definition that we all agreed on. Tribalistic discourse is probably going to continue to be the correct term to describe our debates. I agree with the neg that we're too deep into it to realistically shift away from it. We can try to improve it. We can try to make it better resemble the way that we understand a debate in the form that we're having now, an academic one where we are seeking to educate and we're using facts and a little bit of strategy. So to conclude, we think of human beings as people who can reasonably communicate with each other, and all the ones in this Zoom meeting like to practice it in a true way. We're not trying to deceive, but at the end of the day, the point of a debate is to educate the audience, and hopefully you believe that that's not what our political debates aim to do. Thank you for y'all's time watching this. Y'all have a good night.
Thank you very much, Sam. And now let's move on to our negative team, closing out the negative side of the resolution and the entire debate itself. We have Pawas Gupta.
Thank you, Ted. Just starting out, I want to thank our guest speakers for taking time out to be here today and talking with such expertise. Ted, of course, for moderating this and making sure it runs smoothly, and of course my opponents and my partner Benna. Just to start off, there's been a lot of focus from the AF side on debate. Theirs is a more hardline stance, and as we've seen, there have been no proposals on how to improve the system or what to change the platform of debate with from the AF. And time and again, the AF have practically defined rhetoric, but the next states again and again that there is no way, just given the nature of politics, to remove rhetoric and politics. What politics what politicians aim to do is persuade people to vote in their favor along their party lines and for their policies. The neg, we contend that the bipartisan system in the US allows for simpler identification, and just for efficiency purposes, it allows citizens to align with particular political parties and vote in that direction. Just given how big a democracy we are, it makes sure that things run smoothly and more efficiently. The very platform of debate allows for the common citizen to identify with the people speaking on stage. I wouldn't as much know that the person contesting elections is a real person from the media as I would from them participating in the debate, especially when they're answering their opponents. And that really allows me as a layperson to understand that, yes, these policies are actually coming from real human beings. And yes, we do concede that they have their own agendas, but that those motivations lie within every human being. Second, as Benna stated, just the very platform of debate allows for increased voter participation, which is the need of the hour within the democracy. I think for these reasons, and just for the line of argumentation that we saw here tonight, you should vote neg. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pavis. Thank you to all four of our debaters, and of course to both of our guest speakers. I want to remind everybody who is watching that right now is the time to vote. Now that you've heard all the arguments and you've listened to our speakers, based on what you have heard and solely on what you've heard, completely excuse your own personal biases here and tell us, who do you think made the better argument? The affirmative or the negative on the resolution, America's political debates missed the mark. Now's the time to vote. Again, the winner will be who ends up changing the audience's mind the most from the beginning to the end. And we will have our winner to announce at our debate in 2 weeks. Again, our next debate is going to be on February 18th at 7 p.m., where the resolution will be smart technology cannot be private. We're really looking forward to that. It's going to be absolutely fascinating, just like tonight's debate. So I want to say, again, a quick thank you to all four of our debaters. A huge thank you to both of our guest speakers for coming out and joining us and giving us some context before our event tonight. I want to obviously always give a huge shout out to our UA Debate Series interns who did a great job promoting and putting on this event for you. And of course, I want to thank you, the audience, for tuning in. Please make sure that you tune in and that you sign on to our Twitter and our Instagram and our Facebook pages. It's the best way to learn about the debates that we're going to be having in the future. I'm Ted McLuth, beardlessly coming for you from Tucson, Arizona. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and I will talk to you next time.